Vietnam, 1965. An electronic warfare officer, a backseater who'd flown B-52s, sat through a mission briefing for a new concept. The Air Force wanted crews to fly into North Vietnamese airspace, deliberately get shot at by surface-to-air missiles, and then destroy the SAM sites before the missiles killed them. The EWO listened, then said, "You want me to fly in the back of a little tiny fighter aircraft with a crazy fighter pilot who thinks he's invincible, home in on a SAM site in North Vietnam, and shoot it before it shoots me? You gotta be shitting me." That response, "You gotta be shitting me," became the unofficial motto of Wild Weasel crews. YGBSM, it's on their patches, painted on their aircraft, because the mission is exactly as insane as it sounds. 26 years later, during Operation Desert Storm, F-4G Wild Weasels flew 3,942 combat sorties. They fired 1,000 HARM missiles. They destroyed 200 Iraqi SAM sites, 74% of all enemy air defense radars eliminated during the war. And they did it all following the Wild Weasel creed: first in, last out. Go in before the strike packages to clear a path. Stay after everyone else leaves to make sure no one gets shot on the way out. This is the story of the Wild Weasels in Desert Storm, the most dangerous job in the war. The crews who deliberately made themselves targets so other pilots could survive, and why no coalition aircraft was ever shot down by a SAM while Wild Weasels were present. By January 1991, Iraq had one of the most sophisticated integrated air defense systems in the world. French-designed KARI command network, Soviet equipment, hundreds of radar-guided SAM sites, SA-2 guideline missiles with 30-mile range, SA-3 Goa, SA-6 Gainful, SA-8 Gecko, thousands of anti-aircraft artillery pieces. Baghdad alone was protected by 76 SAM launchers and nearly 3,000 AAA guns. It was the most heavily defended city since Hanoi during the Vietnam War. And coalition planners knew that if conventional aircraft tried to penetrate that defense without suppression, losses would be catastrophic. F-16s, F-A-18s, F-15Es, none of them had the stealth capability of F-117s. They'd show up on Iraqi radar the moment they crossed the border. SAMs would launch. Aircraft would die. Unless someone went in first and destroyed the radars. That's where the Wild Weasels came in. The F-4G Advanced Wild Weasel was a modified F-4E Phantom, a fighter jet designed in the 1950s, still flying combat missions in 1991. The 20mm cannon had been ripped out and replaced with Yen APR-47 electronic warfare equipment. Radar warning receivers that could detect enemy radar emissions. Threat analysis computers that identified what type of SAM was tracking you. Direction-finding systems that calculated the exact location of the radar. And AGM-88 HARM missiles, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, that could home in on radar emissions from up to 40 miles away. The concept was simple. Iraqi SAM operators turn on their radars to track coalition aircraft. The F-4G systems immediately detect it, identify the type, SA-2, SA-6, whatever, calculate the location, and fire a HARM that rides the radar beam straight back to its source at Mach 2. The catch: you have to let them shoot at you first. If the Iraqi radar stays off, you can't find it, can't target it, can't kill it. So Wild Weasel crews deliberately made themselves targets. 3 units deployed F-4GS to Desert Storm, the 35th Tactical Fighter Wing from George Air Force Base, California, the 52nd TFW from Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany, and detachments from Clark Air Base, Philippines. They arrived in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain in August 1990, among the first combat units in theater, and they immediately began planning how to dismantle Iraq's air defense network. The strategy was methodical. Start with the long-range threats, SA-2s that could reach high-altitude bombers, destroy those, then move closer and go after SA-6s covering Iraqi ground forces. Layer by layer, roll back the air defense system until Iraqi SAM sites were operating autonomously, cut off from central command, looking through what one pilot called a soda straw, searching blind for American aircraft they couldn't find. But there was a problem. The F-4G was a fuel hog. From Bahrain to Baghdad required 2 air refuelings, and the more external fuel tanks you carried, the fewer harms you could load. Standard configuration for European missions: 3 fuel tanks, 2 harms. That worked when you were flying short distances from German bases to targets in Central Europe. For Desert Storm missions to Baghdad, over 400 miles, crews needed maximum fuel, which meant 1 external tank and 4 harms. But even with that loadout, fuel was always critical. Some wild weasels couldn't make it all the way to Baghdad and still have enough gas to get home. Which meant that when strike packages attacked downtown Baghdad, not all the wild weasels assigned to protect them made it to the target. Some had to turn back early. Others fired their harms and then had no choice but to leave. They were defenseless and low on fuel. The strike packages were attacking without full air defense suppression, and Iraqi SAM operators knew it. January 17, 1991, 3 a.m. Baghdad time, Operation Desert Storm begins. Wild Weasels are part of the first wave. Their mission: destroy Iraqi air defense radars along the route strike packages will use, clear a path through the integrated air defense network. The first 4 hours are chaos. Wild Weasel crews report over 100 Iraqi radar emissions, SAM sites lighting up across the country, missiles launching, the sky over Iraq filled with surface-to-air missiles streaking toward coalition aircraft. And then the Wild Weasels go to work. When a pilot fires a harm, they announce it over the radio with one word: Magnum. During those first 4 hours, the word Magnum is called approximately 200 times. 200 harms fired at Iraqi air defense radars. 200 sites either destroyed or forced to shut down to avoid being killed. Within 18 hours, Iraqi SAM activity over Kuwait drops from over 100 active radars to 15. By the end of the second day, it's sporadic. Iraqi air defense crews have learned: if you turn on your radar, you die. Major Robert Muskrat McNeese was an F-4G pilot with the 35th Tactical Fighter Wing. He turned 40 years old on January 30th, 1991. Where did he celebrate his birthday? Over Baghdad with fireworks, Iraqi fireworks. I had my 45th birthday over Baghdad with fireworks and everything, McNeese would later say. His missions followed a brutal pattern: take off from Sheikh Issa Air Base in Bahrain in zero visibility fog, taxi at walking speed just to line up on the runway, navigate by instruments, refuel twice in the air on the way to Baghdad, 4 to 5 hours round trip, fight through Iraqi air defenses, refuel again on the way out because you're running on fumes. We were fighting the Iraqis and the weather, McNeese said. The weather was instrument meteorological conditions most of the time. Fog so thick you couldn't see your wingman. And then you'd fly into Baghdad and get shot at, on purpose. On most missions to Baghdad, Wild Weasel flights used beer call signs, PABSD, BUDWISER, Miller for each 4-ship flight. McNeese's targets included the airfield at Al-Taqaddum near Fallujah. That airfield had MiG-29s. SA-2 and SA-3 missiles, long-range search radars. We were called missile killers, McNeese said, but we could also attack their long-range search radars. The tactics evolved throughout the campaign. Hunter-killer teams from Vietnam, where an F-4G Wild Weasel would be teamed with conventional F-4Es to destroy missile sites using cluster munitions, were improved. One tactic used during Desert Storm was called Here, Kitty Kitty. One weasel would get the attention of a SAM or anti-aircraft artillery site, Get them to turn on their radar and start shooting. Meanwhile, other Weasels would sneak up behind the site and destroy it with HARMs or Maverick missiles. It was cat and mouse, except the mouse had teeth, and the mouse deliberately made itself bait. One F-4G from the 35th TFW fired over 40 HARM missiles during the 43-day air campaign. That aircraft, tail number 697216, is now displayed at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. 40 missions, 40 separate engagements where Iraqi air defenses tried to kill that crew, and they kept coming back. But the wild Weasels weren't invincible. On January 18, 1991, F-4G tail number 697571 from Spangdahlem Air Base launched on a seed mission during the opening hours of Desert Storm. During its sortie, anti-aircraft artillery fire punctured several fuel cells. Captain Tim Burke and Captain Juan Galindez completed their mission and headed back to Saudi Arabia. They attempted an emergency landing at King Khalid Military City Airport, but visibility was near zero. After several landing attempts failed and the aircraft ran out of fuel, Burke and Galindez ejected. Both survived. The F-4G crashed in the desert outside the base. It was the only F-4G lost during Desert Storm, and it was lost not to a SAM, the threat wild Weasels were designed to suppress, but to anti-aircraft artillery fire in bad weather. That's significant. 3,942 combat sorties, deliberately flying into the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, making themselves targets, and only one aircraft lost. But the real measure of wild Weasel success isn't how many of them survived. It's how many other pilots survived because of them. During Operation Desert Storm, no coalition aircraft was shot down by a surface-to-air missile, while wild Weasels were present in the area protecting them. None. If you were a strike pilot heading into Iraq and you heard wild Weasels on the radio, you knew you were protected. The crazy bastards who volunteered to get shot at were making sure you came home. Captain James Augie Cuxhouse, an electronic warfare officer with the 35th TFW, described what it was like in the back seat of an F-4G. More than most aircraft, the F-4G was built around the fellow in the back seat, who often pushed the pickle button for the missiles. The F-4 was a hog on fuel, so some of the hairiest experiences involved getting to the tanker. On one mission, we had to make 3 tries on 2 tankers before we could get our receptacle to work and take on fuel. Think about that. You're over enemy territory, you're low on fuel. The tanker's receptacle isn't working, and Iraqi SAMs are actively trying to kill you. That's the job. The Wild Weasel mission adapted throughout the campaign. Initially, Iraqi SAM operators were willing to turn on their radars. They'd engage coalition aircraft, fire missiles. The Wild Weasels would destroy them. But as the war progressed and hundreds of SAM sites were eliminated, Iraqi operators changed tactics. They stopped turning on their radars. They knew that if they emitted, they died, so they stayed quiet. This created a problem for wild Weasels. If Iraqi radars don't turn on, there's nothing to shoot HARMs at. Crews were returning from missions with unfired missiles. So the wild Weasels adapted. They shifted from SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, to DEAD, destruction of enemy air defenses. Instead of just carrying HARMs to shoot at radars, they loaded precision-guided Maverick missiles, Mark 82 bombs, Mark 84 bombs, and CBU-87 cluster munitions. If Iraqi SAM sites wouldn't turn on their radars, the wild Weasels would find them visually and destroy them with bombs. Our basic reasoning, one wild Weasel pilot wrote, was that if the enemy is in little pieces on the desert, then he's about as suppressed as can be. The HARM does little damage to the actual SAMs because it homes in on the emitting radar. The launchers are undamaged, so these SAMs can still be launched ballistically, modified for infrared use, or used in other unexpected ways. So Wild Weasels started flying as precision strike aircraft, taking out SAM sites with Mavericks, destroying radar installations with bombs, eliminating anti-aircraft artillery emplacements with cluster munitions. They'd become multi-role, still carrying harms in case Iraqi radars came up, but also capable of destroying air defense systems even when the radar stayed off. By the end of Desert Storm, Wild Weasels had accounted for destruction of 9 SAM sites and 24 AAA emplacements through bombing alone, separate from the 200 radar sites destroyed by harms. The 52nd Tactical Fighter Wing operated differently from the 35th. They flew from Turkey as part of Operation Proven Force, the Northern Air Campaign. Their mission was to knock out concentrated SAM batteries around strategic targets in northern Iraq, not a fully integrated air defense network like in southern Iraq and Kuwait, but still dangerous. Radar-guided SAMs protecting oil refineries, military installations, and Ba'ath Party headquarters. The wing flew 12-ship Weasel packages in daytime mass raids plus 8-ship flights as part of nighttime strikes. As they substituted DEAD for SCAD, they kept one 4-ship flight as dedicated HARM shooters for when SAMs did come up. Another 4-ship had Maverick and HARM loadout for precision strikes on high-value targets. The last 4-ship carried Mark 82s, Mark 84s, and CBU 87s. For the most part, Iraqi SAM operators in the north preferred to keep their heads down, so the result was infrequent SAM launches, while the Weasels bombed air defense sites into rubble. The 52nd TFW's 81st Tactical Fighter Squadron was credited with 142 SAM site kills during the campaign. They suppressed many others during 4,000 combat hours. And they did it with no crew losses. By the end of Desert Storm, F-4G Wild Weasels had accomplished their mission completely. 3,942 combat sorties flown, 1,000 HARM missiles fired, 200 Iraqi missile sites destroyed, 74% of all enemy air defense radars eliminated during the war. 1 F-4G lost, 2 crew members ejected safely, 0 combat fatalities. And most importantly, no coalition aircraft shot down by SAMs while Wild Weasels were protecting them. The Iraqi Integrated Air Defense System, which pre-war analysts predicted would inflict significant coalition casualties, was shattered in the first week. By the time the ground war started on February 24th, coalition aircraft operated over Iraq with near impunity. That's not because Iraqi SAM operators were cowards, it's because they were rational. They knew that turning on their radars meant certain death. Wild Weasel harms would find them within seconds, so they stayed quiet, hid, didn't engage. Mission accomplished. The F-4G Wild Weasel flew its last combat mission in January 1996 during Operation Deny Flight over Bosnia. The aircraft was retired shortly after. Too old, too maintenance-intensive, too expensive to operate. The Wild Weasel mission continues today with F-16CJ Fighting Falcons and F-35 Lightning IIs, modern aircraft with advanced avionics and stealth capabilities. But they still follow the same creed: first in, last out. Because the mission hasn't changed, someone still has to go in first and suppress enemy air defenses. Someone still has to deliberately make themselves a target so strike aircraft can complete their missions. Someone still has to stay behind and make sure everyone gets home safely. It's still the most dangerous job in the sky. Peter Ratcliffe, Regimental Sergeant Major of 22 SAS during Desert Storm, wrote about professionalism under fire, about doing impossible jobs because they need to be done, about volunteers who accept extraordinary risks for ordinary reasons. It's the mission. Wild Weasel crews embodied that. 40-year-old majors celebrating birthdays over Baghdad. Electronic warfare officers troubleshooting tanker receptacles while SAMs streaked past their canopy. Pilots with families back home choosing to fly into the most defended airspace on Earth because strike pilots needed them. No glory, no headlines, just the knowledge that if they did their job right, other aircrew came home alive. The motto on the Wild Weasel patch, YGBSM, "You gotta be shitting me," captures the absurdity of the mission. Deliberately getting shot at, flying aircraft older than most crew chiefs, going in first when everyone else held back. But they did it anyway, 3,942 times, and they kept coming back. If you flew Wild Weasels in Desert Storm, or knew someone who did, share your stories in the comments. And subscribe to Gulf War Chronicles for more untold stories from the war. Until next time.